Thank you, everybody, for spending some time to allow me to go through the sharing economy and also my experience of AnyGood and also how it helps people find work. My name's Juliet Eccleston, and I'm the CEO and founder of AnyGood and also the chair of Sharing Economy UK. And I've heard from some of the previous talks that we've talked a little bit about gig economy work, and so that's very much the focus for the opportunity that I'd like to share with you, and also a little bit about the platform that I have because it is specific to work and careers. Do feel free to ask any questions in the chat, and we'll definitely have some time at the end to go through those because I'd really like to engage with people here and get some feedback and really hear from people as to what their thoughts are on this very new industry that we're a part of and that's definitely massively growing. So let me take you a little bit through my journey of AnyGood. In terms of where it started, this is the number it started from, £161,700. That was the amount of money that a recruitment agency made when a contractor was extended beyond 6 months as planned to over 4 years. That contractor was me. And it really made me take a step back and think about part of the process that I'd been involved in. It made me look at different business models and different ways to operate that maybe were emerging but weren't traditional across other industries. It made me look at platforms like Airbnb and how they'd transformed the travel industry and Uber and taxis and all of these other types of different models. And it made me really think, how could a different model work within the recruitment industry? So I then spent around the last sort of 8 to 10 years really researching the sharing economy, all of the different models from borrowing someone's dog to staying in a home to borrowing a seat in a car to sharing lifts and rides. And we'll talk about some of those later. But one of the things that really focused my attention was that a lot of the reason for these platforms seemed to be that there was a lack of trust in the existing model. Often people find that with recruitment agents, similar to estate agents, there seems to be a lack of trust of an existing model, and that helps a new disruptive model to emerge. When I was thinking about trust, one of the things I wanted to do was to commission some independent research to look at trust within recruitment. So we commissioned some research, and what we found was less than 5% of people trusted agencies to do a good job in terms of matching candidates to a role. And although in itself this may be surprising to people in terms of the lack of trust, one of the things that really excited me was that it seems to be that rather than technology being the innovation, it's actually a profound shift in the way we think about trust that is the innovation in terms of a lot of these business models. Behind a lot of these models, as in the same way as how Airbnb started, there isn't the massive expanse of technology. It's really come from a different idea and a different way to do things, and really helping people to transition their trust from an existing model of operating through to a new model. And that's really the challenge when we look at the sharing economy and two-sided marketplaces, is enabling people to move from a current way of working through to one that's completely brand new that they may not have heard of before. And that's what we found with AnyGood. When we launched AnyGood, it's a two-sided marketplace, and we have employers that share roles on our platform, and then we have members who recommend people for roles. And it's fascinating how, although it's a much more cost-effective way of doing things, it's also, obviously, everybody is personally recommended for roles. So from a quality perspective, it's incredibly high. And it also takes a lot less time. Even though all of these things are in play, with a sharing economy platform, it's brand new, and people just aren't used to doing that in that way. What we find, however, is that the more people use sharing economies and sharing economy platforms and are used to transacting in that way, then that trust tends to be shared across multiple different platforms. And so that tends to be how people start to use one platform and then recognize that actually this can be something that they can use across multiple. One of the things around trust, which is fascinating, which is useful to know if you're thinking about either joining the sharing economy as a platform provider, or even it doesn't even need to be a platform, it can be a physical presence, is how trust is evolving as an economy. And this is one thing that's really interesting to look at from an economic perspective. Trust originally, when sort of over the years, it transitions. Although often people think that trust is reducing in organisations, or it's reducing as a world. Actually, it's not. It moves from one place to another as different economies emerge. Originally, what we found was that trust was very much localized. So an awful lot like actually how we've seen during the pandemic. Trust is very much with our neighbours, where we're asking people for help to pick up prescriptions or to borrow items and to help out much more locally. And this is very much how it was in the beginning, where people were less able to be involved with either large institutions or on a global scale with people that they hadn't met. As more institutions came along, banking, financial services, large corporates, governments started to come along, trust began to transition to institutions. And we start to see a lot of hierarchies and things like that within large businesses. And people started to become much more trustworthy of institutions. What we've seen more recently is that we're moving to more of a distributed trust model. And this is really interesting from a sharing economy perspective, and particularly for gig economy workers. And this is really where we see people beginning to trust strangers. We see that rather than the institutions that were previously trusted, and especially during the banking crisis, that's trust started to be moved to people that you've never even met. And a lot of the way that platforms do that tends to be through building in mechanisms of trust within those platforms. You'll all be aware of sort of 5-star reviews, whether it's on TripAdvisor or Amazon or Uber or Airbnb. All of these platforms have mechanisms to enable you to trust the people that you're interacting with. And it becomes incredibly important to build that trust so that people can transition and take that leap of faith to a completely different model. The same as when you think about cryptocurrencies and that completely bypassing the banking industry. The trend towards favouring trusting strangers, as long as there's a framework of trust there, is one that's growing. Interestingly, what we've seen over the past year is that people are also going back to trusting locals again. And that's really encouraging in terms of people recognising the importance of their local communities, how they can pay it forward to people locally to them and how that feels. And rather than that taking trust away from the distributed model, what we're seeing is that enables that to grow even more as people recognise that there's means to not only share a car perhaps with somebody that's a neighbour, but also there's now platforms for that. And so they start to think about different ways of doing this and different ways of operating. One of the things that is useful is to think about the different models that we have. Within the sharing economy, or certainly Sharing Economy UK, we're often asked what the definition of the sharing economy is. And for us, it's defined as where people share their space, their skills, and their stuff. So it's very broad in terms of the different opportunities that could arise. From an any good perspective, it's all about sharing our networks. Historically, our networks would have been quite small, but with the advent of technology and platforms such as LinkedIn, our networks are now something that tend to grow over time, and people don't tend to think about them as a resource. But in the same way as a spare seat in a car is a resource, so is a network. And that became fascinating to me, to think about all of these people that have got underutilized resources, and how they could maximize on those resources, both in terms of helping people, but also in terms of enabling people to have greater access to work. From an any good perspective, our networks receive, our members receive roles, and they think about who they know. They recommend those people if they would like to be put forward for a role, and then they're put forward for a role on the platform, and that goes directly through to the client. If somebody's hired, then members of our platform will receive £1,500 for the time that they've put into that work. And often you'll see that within platforms where there's a monetary reward for this reutilisation of resources. And what we're also seeing is that as businesses start to become more aware of this new model of working, that they're also thinking how their productivity could increase if they're to think about more about how can we share. And this can be in the region of things such as office space or technologies and even people. So in terms of the other opportunities, just to highlight with you, that you may not have thought about. This is just my brainstorm of all of the things that I'm already aware of that we could be sharing. We already know about rooms and houses and cars. There are boats, there's Camp 2, there's caravans, there's Tent 2, phones, Borrow My Dog, childcare, lawnmower skills, task rabbits out there. Cars are incredibly popular, and yes, I've even put goats and llamas at the end because they're Airbnb over the pandemic have done sharing of experiences, and you can also I saw recently, if you want to spice up your Zoom call, you can dial in a goat from a farm just to spice up a meeting. And so you would be surprised as to the different types of things that you can share and reuse and borrow, but also things that you have yourself that's worth thinking about. I know a lot of people, when I talk to them about the sharing economy, think that they need to have a spare room in their house or a car to share, but actually there's so much that can be shared, both in terms of physical items, but also things such as networks, skills, experience, those kinds of things as well. So looking at the opportunity before we start to move into maybe some questions, and I'd love to hear about people in terms of how you think you might be able to use the sharing economy. Meaningful work and careers can come from many sources, and I think although we often talk about traditional sources a lot in terms of jobs that are shared and skills that are shared, sharing economy platforms are worth considering because they can help to deliver this. And whether it's a business that's being provided with sharing economy resources or an individual person, it's worth considering whether something can be borrowed or shared before it's bought. One of the massive trends that we're seeing within the sharing economy is the younger generation beginning to use more sharing economy platforms as they start to go through their careers and their lives. We've seen that 70% of 18 to 13-year-olds have already engaged with sharing economy platforms at some point. And so what we'll begin to see is that that generation move through their careers is that this will be something absolutely normal to them. Although today I'm here talking about the sharing economy, really the ideal is for us to not think of it as something new, but think of it as something that this is just the way that things operate. One of the things that's really helping that is the need for us to share more from an environment perspective. And there are some stats that I have around that, around sustainability and commuting. CarShare, one of our members of Sharing Economy UK, is a platform where you can borrow other people's cars instead of having your own, and you can obviously share your own car with others. And throughout the pandemic, they were helping key workers get to work who didn't have cars. And so they really helped during the pandemic. And one of the things that they shared with us was that commuting accounts for 5% of emissions. And so for those people that are now beginning to think about how they want to spend their money or spend their time, the environment is very much one of the top considerations for that. And the same for businesses. Will businesses consider to continue to have a fleet of cars, or will they look at how they could perhaps share cars more effectively, either internally or with other organisations or external to that even? From a clothing perspective, there are many platforms that now share their share clothes. We buy 2 tons of clothing every minute, which is a considerable amount of garments that then end up in landfill. In fact, I've got records of 11 million garments that end up in landfill every week. And whilst we have that, the other thing that's happening as a trend that we see is that people are less worried about ownership and more considering of rental rather than owning. And that's a massively interesting trend in terms of moving towards that. From an Any Good perspective, as I say, what we're focusing on is enabling people to use their networks to be able to recommend people for roles. What we see as a benefit of that is that people are, rather than it being something where people have to intentionally apply for a role and believe that they have all of the skills and experience for it, we're seeing that our members are acting as allies and amplifiers for those that maybe might not have the confidence to go for a job otherwise. We certainly have an awful lot of candidates that have been put forward for roles that have said that without the member recommending them, they wouldn't have had the confidence to have applied for the role otherwise. And that's really interesting from my perspective, that our members are acting as allies and amplifiers for those that may not have the confidence to apply for roles. And so from a social mobility perspective, we're starting to see a positive influence on those who are obtaining roles through the platform. And in the same way as people sharing cars, people renting wardrobes, people doing all of this thing in terms of sharing and renting rather than buying and owning, we're seeing a much more of a positive impact, both on the economy, on social mobility, and on the environment. And all of those topics are things that the next generation of people, as we are too, are very aware of and very interested in. So from an opportunity perspective, this really does allow us to consider additional and flexible sources of income. Whether you're considering a platform where you can consolidate other people sharing, or whether you're thinking about a platform where you can share your own skills and experiences and things that you have. Access to work as well through training, skill sharing, and obviously platforms like mine that help with recommendations are also massively enabling people to have much more in the way of opportunities. It's definitely worth looking at those who are sharing skills and training freely, but also there are now mentoring platforms where people are helping to coach people into roles. And also, as I say, it can be used as a business opportunity directly or indirectly, whether that's things such as, so as you will see a new business grow and scale like Airbnb, there are now multiple industries that have launched in order to support those industries. So as one industry launches, it brings along a whole other industry, for example, cleaning companies for Airbnb properties. And you'll see an awful lot of these as those organisations scale even more, and as this becomes the norm rather than something that's less known. So just on a final note before we go into questions, really what I was interested in hearing from was what resources you have and how you think that they can be shared, reused or borrowed. And obviously any questions on Any Good.
So there's somebody who's raised their hands. So Arhan Polat.
Hello?
So Arhan, you can speak out your question.
Oh, okay. I'm now, okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Very nice. Thank you very much, Juliet,
Thank
for
you.
your presentation. My name is Orhan Polat. I'm in the Netherlands based. And my question is like, what kind of developments in your business due to social media like LinkedIn marketing? Can LinkedIn much more be valued to your insight, what you want to reach with your concept, with your vision?
So we do use LinkedIn in terms of reaching out to identify new members. One of the things I know that LinkedIn does do a recommendation facility. One of the things that with LinkedIn recommendations is that as a candidate, you proactively ask for a recommendation. And that is a different transaction than thinking about who do I know that would be great at that role and can I put them forward for it. So as a candidate, it shows you who you know at that organisation, and you ask if you can be recommended in. And so what we see is it tends to be a different type of recommendation that people have, and people feel a certain level of feeling obliged to provide a recommendation rather than proactively being put forward. And so it tends to be quite a different experience for candidates around that in terms of people being recommended for roles. But certainly the way that we've grown the platform has involved LinkedIn considerably, but also meetup groups. The platform, one of the things I was concerned about from a platform perspective was that in it growing organically, because members can recommend other members to join, it might grow in a direction that we didn't want it to grow in. And we're very passionate about it being a representation of society.
Okay.
And so we proactively curate the network as well as it growing organically. So we work with groups such as Women Returners, UK Black Tech, neurodiverse groups, to make sure that as our membership grows, it grows in a way that when an employer shares a role, they can be confident that it's being shared with a diverse group of members. And so that tends to be how we use LinkedIn more. It's both from a, as we grow as a platform, we suddenly find we need somebody in an area of the country that we don't currently have. And so we invite members to join in those areas, but also we use it very much to proactively seek out diverse people that can help make sure that, as I say, we're a good representation of society.
Great. Juliet, then the last question, do you then have a LinkedIn group where you can be like a member? Is that what you have also?
So we have a specific platform rather than that's separate to LinkedIn. But it's absolutely free to join the platform. We're currently, we only have UK-based roles, but if members can be from anywhere. So if people know people within the UK, then that is still a useful platform to join. The website I've just popped up on the screen, but so people can join freely. There are other benefits, such as if you were to recommend somebody else to join and they got a job through us through other means, then you would still receive a financial reward as well. And the financial reward is always interesting in these platforms, I think, and especially considering that they often are compared to employee referrals, because we were very we were very mindful of not over rewarding people, because then it can drive a certain behaviour, but reflecting that people have put some effort into thinking about who they know and rewarding people for the effort and thanking people for that. And so we have found this sort of balance, and I think the payments that we provide are generous, but not so generous that it influences the quality of the candidates that we receive.
Okay, thank you very much for explaining that.
No problem.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Orhan.
You're welcome.
The next question is from Mariel van der Vorst. Mariel, would you like to come on stage and ask the question, or would you want to? You need to raise your hand if you want to come up on the stage and ask the question. Otherwise, I'm just going to read it out. Oh yeah, she's there.
Hello, do you hear me?
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
You see me? You don't see me. Sorry.
Yeah, now we see you. Yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
No, I think it's really interesting, and I also believe in it. That's what I also mentioned. So I really like it to bring your network forward, and that you can share who you recommend, etc. And at the same time, I sometimes feel it's also a bit overwhelming. Like there's all the kind of networks, and I realize that like only the little things, like I'm buying certain products, I'm always looking for reviews, etc.
Yes.
Sometimes I think, am I going crazy? What is my own opinion now, actually, But I also believe, of course, in when many people think in a certain way, it probably must be good. But maybe it's not even a question, but it's more like,
Yeah, no, I think the reviews are really interesting, and as you know, as any of these economies or different types of models start to grow, we identify the challenges because we sort of are going there first, and like TripAdvisor and reviews on TripAdvisor can be, you know, there can be quite a battle that people have with TripAdvisor reviews, because some of them may be low reviews, but they've been arranged by competitors and that kind of thing, or some of them have been paid for because they're, you know, trying to increase their own ratings. And so as these new models emerge, new challenges emerge as well around it, and you know, as I mentioned, the whole businesses that generate that are generated as a result of these companies, like companies that you can just get to pay to review things, are also also exist, and so. Just as you know, Uber recently, over the last you know, couple of weeks, they are now moving their UK Uber drivers to being workers and providing benefits to them, and so gig economy workers and platforms are very much at the front of new models of things happening, and that will result in new challenges being identified that we have to tackle as we go through. And I think platforms where there is some level of validation over the trust rating or the quality rating are very important to us. And certainly what happens on our platform when a member recommends a candidate, if that, depending on the quality of the candidate based on the job description, they may be a brilliant candidate, but they may not be a brilliant candidate for that particular job. So our employers are able to rate the quality of candidates that come through. But that rating is internal to us. It's not something that's seen externally. It's something where we can go in, because also what we find is different employers have got different views, and they also change their minds a lot. And so an employer may share a role, and then they get some candidates through and they think, actually, that's helped us refine what we want. We don't really want what we thought we wanted. We want something completely different now. And so unfortunately, the candidate isn't successful in moving forwards, and they may get a low rating. And so we only use it internally in order to help us look at how well we're doing as we start to scale.
Yeah, there's some ethical questions, of course, as well, because employees are not a market or something. Yeah, there is a market, of course, but it's a bit sad to share negative.
I think you have to be quite savvy when you're on these platforms, and recognize that there may be some reviews on there that aren't entirely valid, and I know platforms are doing an awful lot to try and validate reviews to make sure that they're true reviews.
Yeah. But I think you described the trend very well, that people begin to trust strangers, and that this network is getting more and more important. I think we all recognize that. So I thought it was really interesting session. Just want to share.
That's good to hear.
Thanks, Marielle. Okay, so there's one more sort of reflection. This is from Venkatesh, who says, job support only in Netherlands or across the world is possible, ma'am? And I think you've already answered that. Yeah, but go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, at the moment, from an Any Good perspective, we are able to share roles beyond the UK, and we do often do that, and members can join that aren't in the UK. But predominantly, you know, we're a startup that's scaling, and so at the moment it's quite UK focused. But that's not to say that that we wouldn't be going elsewhere beyond the UK. That's certainly our plans over the next few years.
Yeah, and I think going forward, so we probably also will have more gig economy jobs coming up as well, where the requirement may be in the UK, but could be serviced from pretty much anywhere in the world. So. Yeah,
absolutely, and that's certainly something we're seeing on the platform as roles come through, where we have a specific organisation that we're working with at the moment, where the role isn't just remote, but it's remote anywhere in Europe. And so we're starting to see a lot more of that happening, where it may be worldwide or it may be Europe, depending on their employment insurance. But we're seeing a lot more of that work anywhere, and that being literally globally.
Excellent. And I think Paulina Paloma has said hello to you. Hello, Juliet. So yeah, I'm just reading out a few from the
Sure,
chat.
and feel free to connect on LinkedIn and you know, or email me. I've put all of my contact details up there. If you're interested in further information, whether that's about Any Good or sharing economy or other platforms, do feel free to get in touch.
Thank you so much, Juliet. So with that, we would bring this session to an end. This was really insightful. Ladies and gentlemen, the contacts are already here. So if any one of you wants to get in touch, please do so. Thank you again, Juliet.
Thank you.